The signal should not have existed. Officer Kellen knew this the way she knew her own heartbeat. For Chambers, steady, reliable, trained to ignore the impossible. But the impossible was screaming through her console now, sharp and clean, cutting through 20,000 years of static like a blade through silk. Her claws hovered over the controls, trembling at the edges. 3 of her 4 eyes tracked the data streams, cross-referencing, verifying, rejecting, then verifying again. The 4th eye remained fixed on the viewport, on the darkness where something massive was about to emerge. Nothing ever happened this far out. The edge sectors were punishment duty, quiet, cold, and forgotten. Ships came here to die slowly, their crews counting rotations until rotation no longer mattered. Kellen had accepted that fate when she accepted her commission. She had trained herself to find peace in the silence, to let her mind drift through the long hours between scans, to forget that there was a galaxy out there that had no use for patrol officers on the rim. But the signal kept coming. She isolated it again, stripping away the layers of cosmic noise that had accumulated over millennia. The frequency was ancient, older than the Concorde itself, older than most of the species that now filled its council chambers. She had studied this frequency in history modules, back when she was a hatchling with too many questions and too few answers. Every child in the Galactic Concorde learned about the Breach War. Every child learned about the sacrifice. Every child was taught to mourn the species that burned itself to ash so others could live. The humans. But humans were gone. Extinct. Dead. Their star had collapsed. Their system had been consumed by the very weapon they had built to stop the Devourers. The history modules were clear, precise, and utterly certain. There were monuments. There were memorial days. There was a specific kind of grief that the galaxy had perfected over 200 centuries, the grief of owing a debt that could never be repaid. And yet, Kellen's third heart skipped a beat as the computer finished assembling the data. The shape that emerged on her screen was not a debris field. It was not a ghost signature, not a sensor ghost, not a malfunction. It was a vessel, approximately 8 kilometers in length, with hull markings that predated the Concorde itself. This mass was staggering. Its power signature was faint but unmistakable. Reactors that had been running for longer than Kellen's entire civilization had existed. The ship was old, older than old, ancient beyond measure, and it was broadcasting on human frequencies. She keyed the comm with a hand that refused to stop shaking. Command, this is Patrol 79. I have contact. Unknown vessel, bearing 347 Mark 12. Broadcasting on. She stopped, swallowed hard, forced the words out. Broadcasting on human frequencies. Repeat, human frequencies. Please advise. The response took 3 minutes. In those minutes, Kellen watched the vessel drift closer. Its surface scarred by unimaginable age, pitted by radiation and micrometeorite impacts that had accumulated over millennia. Lights flickered deep within its structure. Not the steady glow of active systems, but something fainter. Embers. Fires that had refused to die. When command finally responded, the voice was tight with disbelief. Repeat your last. 79. Human frequencies. Command. I'm reading a vessel approximately 8 kilometers in length. Hull composition matches pre-silence era construction. It's transmitting a repeating message. Stand by. Kellen did not stand by. She could not. Her hands moved across the console with desperate precision, isolating the transmission, feeding it through every translation matrix she had access to. The message was simple. A series of numbers and symbols that her computer struggled to interpret. Old Earth mathematics. Old Earth language. Words that hadn't been spoken aloud in 200 centuries. The translation appeared slowly, character by character, as if the computer itself was unsure what it was seeing. We remain. Kellen's breath caught. She read it again. We remain. Not we survived. Not we are coming. We remain, as if they had never left. As if 20,000 years of presumed extinction had been nothing but a misunderstanding. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask command for further instructions, to do exactly what she had been trained to do. But instead, she found herself whispering into the calm, her voice barely steady. This is Patrol Officer Kellen of the Galactic Concorde. If you can hear this, We receive your message. She paused. The silence stretched. We remain too. For a long moment nothing changed. Space held its breath. The vessel hung in the darkness ahead, silent, waiting, ancient beyond comprehension. Kellen watched her scanners, watched the power signatures that refused to change, watched the life signs that the computer was beginning to identify. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, all human. Then the ship responded. Not with words, with light. The entire vessel blazed awake section by section until it burned against the void like a newborn star, its hull transforming from scarred metal to a brilliant beacon that outshone the distant nebulae. Kellen's screens exploded with data, life signs multiplying, power signatures dwarfing anything the Concorde had built in 5 centuries, shield matrices that operated on principles she had never seen before. And a new message, transmitted in flawless galactic standard. Request docking clearance for diplomatic envoy. Humanity has returned. Kellen sat frozen, staring at words that rewrote everything she thought she knew about the universe. Behind her, alarms began to sound. Command was screaming through the calm, demanding explanations she couldn't give. Other ships were jumping into the sector, their captains demanding answers that she had no authority to provide. She looked at the ghost ship. No, not a ghost ship anymore. A living vessel, crewed by living beings, carrying living hope that had somehow survived the death of stars. And she understood, with terrible clarity, what was about to happen. The Concorde had abandoned Earth. She had read the classified files once, during academy training, when she had been young and curious and foolish enough to access documents that were meant to remain sealed. The files told a different story than the history modules. They told of distress calls, desperate pleas, a species that had begged for help and received only silence. The Council had voted to quarantine the sector instead. Too dangerous. Too costly. Better to let one species die than risk the many. Humanity hadn't just sacrificed themselves. They had been sacrificed, and now they were back. The Council chamber had never been so quiet. Kellen stood at attention in the center of the vast circular room, her 4 eyes fixed straight ahead, her claws pressed tight against her thighs. Above her, holographic displays showed the human vessel in terrifying clarity. Its dimensions, its power signatures, the thousands of life signs that her scanners had confirmed beyond any doubt. Around her, representatives from 47 species filled the tiered galleries, their collective silence heavier than any sound she had ever heard. She had been summoned within hours of the encounter, escorted through jump gates she had never been cleared to use, brought before the highest authority in the known galaxy as if she were a criminal rather than the officer who had made the most significant discovery in 20,000 years. High Counselor Vexith spoke first, his voice carefully neutral, deliberately calm. He was old, even by the standards of his long-lived species, and his face carried the weight of centuries. Officer Kellen, your initial report has been reviewed. We need absolute clarity before we proceed. Kellen forced herself to breathe. Yes, Counselor. You are certain the vessel is crewed by living humans? Yes, Counselor. Bioscans confirmed it. Approximately 15,000 life signs. Human baseline physiology with minor variations. There, she hesitated, unsure how to phrase what she had seen. They're alive. A ripple of sound moved through the chamber. Clicks, hums, whispers in a dozen languages. Somewhere above her, someone made a sound that might have been fear or might have been hope. Vexith raised one clawed hand, and the chamber fell silent again. Minor variations, he repeated. Explain. Kellen's throat felt dry. They've adapted, sir. Enhanced bone density, increased radiation resistance, modifications to their cellular repair mechanisms. The data suggests they've been living in difficult conditions for a very long time. Generations, perhaps. Their biology has shifted to accommodate environments that would be hostile to their ancestors. Impossible, someone muttered from the upper galleries. The breach consumed everything. We detected the detonation. Earthstar collapsed exactly as predicted. There was nothing left. Then explain the ship, Kellen said, and immediately regretted her tone. But Vexith only gestured for her to continue, his expression unreadable. Sir, Their vessel predates the silence. The hull materials, the design, the construction methods, everything matches records from before the war. They left before the detonation. They must have left, Counselor Mresh repeated. Her voice was thin with age, brittle as old bone. She was Vari, one of the few species old enough to remember the breach war firsthand. You're saying they evacuated? Yes, Counselor. Without our knowledge. Kellen hesitated. The classified files burned in her memory. The distress calls, the desperate transmissions, the Council's quiet decision to look away. She had read them once, years ago, and she had tried to forget. But she had never succeeded. I believe they sent warnings, she said carefully. I believe they asked for help. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vexitha's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted. A subtle tension that told Kellen she had stepped onto dangerous ground. Some of them knew, Mresh said quietly. Some of them saw what was coming and ran. Not ran, Kellen said. Survived. Vexitha's eyes hardened. You overstep, officer. With respect, sir. Kellen stopped herself, took a breath and started again. They sent a diplomatic envoy request. They could have attacked. They could have broadcast their return across every comm channel in the galaxy. Instead, they asked permission to dock. They're following our protocols. Because they're planning something. A voice called out from the galleries. Humans were always clever. This is a trick. Kellen felt anger flash through her chest. Or maybe they just want to talk. About what? Vexith leaned forward, his eyes sharp. What could they possibly want after 20,000 years? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Kellen had no answer. She had only the memory of the signal, the words that had burned across her screen. We remain. And she had only the quiet certainty that whatever humanity wanted, it was not what the Council expected. The chamber doors opened. A human walked in. Kellen had seen images, of course. Every student studied the extinct species, learned to recognize their features, their proportions, the strange symmetry of their faces. But holos and historical files could not capture the presence of the real thing. The human was tall. Taller than Kellen expected, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. She wore no armor, no weapons, just a simple gray uniform marked with symbols Kellen did not recognize. She walked to the center of the chamber like she owned it. Her steps measured, her posture impossible to intimidate. My name is Commander Asher Kinte, she said, and her voice carried without amplification. Clear, strong, ancient. I represent the Eternal Fleet. We come in peace, but we do not come seeking forgiveness. Vexith found his voice first. Commander Kinte, on behalf of the Galactic Concord, we welcome you, though I confess we have many questions. I imagine you do. Asher's smile did not reach her eyes. You believed we were extinct. You mourned us, built monuments, taught your children that humanity burned itself to ashes to save the galaxy. She paused. That's partially true. Partially. Mresh's voice cracked. We did sacrifice Earth. We did collapse our sun. The Devourers were real, and the weapon we built killed them. Asher's hands clasped behind her back. But we're not fools, counselors. We saw the quarantine. We intercepted your transmissions. We knew you voted to abandon us. The chamber erupted. Denials, accusations, demands for proof. Kellen heard voices shouting over each other. Words in a dozen languages. All of them desperate to deny what they had just heard. Asher stood motionless while chaos swirled around her. Her expression patient. Waiting, Vexith finally restored order with a sharp crack of his gavel. Those were different times, he said carefully. The Concord faced an impossible choice. You faced a difficult choice, Asher corrected. Impossible would have been what we faced. But we made our choice too. We evacuated who we could. Loaded them onto every ship that could fly, generation vessels, colony arcs, science stations, anything with engines and life support. Her voice hardened. We ran. Not away. We ran deep into the dark places between spiral arms, into regions your charts still mark as unnavigable. We survived because we had to, Because no one else would help us. Kellen felt something crack in her chest. The history modules had never mentioned evacuation attempts. Never mentioned humans asking for help. Never mentioned the choice that had been made in this very chamber, centuries before she was born. 20,000 years, Mresh whispered. You've been out there for 20,000 years. Building, learning, adapting. Asher turned slowly, meeting the gaze of every counselor in turn. Remembering. Vexitha's voice was cold. And why have you returned? Asher's expression shifted. The patience remained, but something else moved beneath it. Something older. Because the galaxy is about to need us again. Vexith went very still. Explain. The Devourers weren't a single threat. Asher's words fell like stones into deep water. They were scouts. We've detected gravitational anomalies in 17 sectors. The same signatures we recorded before Earth died. Something's coming, counselors. Something bigger than last time. And when it arrives, the Concord won't survive alone. You expect us to believe. I expect you to scan the data we're transmitting. Asher gestured, and holographic displays flickered to life throughout the chamber. Mathematical models, sensor readings, evidence that made several counselors gasp. You have 6 months, maybe less. After that, everything you've built since the silence will start to die. Kellen watched the data scroll past, her mind's racing. The numbers were undeniable. The patterns were unmistakable. If this was real, why tell us? Vexith demanded. If what you say is true, why warn us at all? Asher's expression softened. For the first time, Kellen saw something human in it. Something tired. Something that had been carrying a weight for far too long. Because despite everything, Asher said quietly, humanity never stopped believing the galaxy was worth saving, even when the galaxy didn't believe in us. She turned toward the exit, then paused. The question isn't whether you trust us, counselors. The question is whether you can afford not to. The doors closed behind her, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Kellen stood motionless, her claws trembling at her sides. She had witnessed something impossible. She had watched history rewrite itself in real time, and she had seen the faces of the counselors, the fear and guilt and denial that flickered behind their carefully neutral expressions. They had abandoned Earth. They had voted to let humanity die. And now, 20,000 years later, humanity had returned to save them anyway. The galaxy was about to change, and Kellen was no longer sure which side she belonged on. The observation deck was empty except for Kellen and Commander Asher Kinte. Below them, the human vessel hung in space like a monument to impossible endurance. Its hull still scarred, still ancient, still carrying the weight of 20,000 years of survival. Kellen had requested this meeting through official channels, half expecting rejection. Instead, Asher had responded within the hour, her message brief and direct. Come alone. Kellen had come alone. She stood at the viewport now, her 4 eyes fixed on the ship that had changed everything. Her claws pressed against the cold metal of the railing. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 beings who understood that words were sometimes inadequate. You wanted to talk, Asher said finally. Her voice was softer here, away from the council chamber. Less formal, almost tired. Off the record. Kellen's claws flexed nervously against the railing. I read the classified files. The ones they don't show Academy students. I know what the council did. I know they received your distress calls. I know they voted to abandon Earth. She paused, forced herself to continue. I'm sorry. Asher was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured. You weren't born yet. Neither were your parents or their parents. Why apologize for choices you didn't make? Because someone should. The words hung between them. Kellen watched the human's reflection in the viewport, searching for any sign of anger, of bitterness, of the righteous fury that surely had to be there. But Asher's face was calm. Not forgiving. Just calm. Maybe, Asher said finally, maybe guilt's a start. Kellen moved closer to the viewport, her eyes tracing the ancient hull markings. Do you believe us about what's coming? The devourers? I ran the numbers myself. The gravitational signatures match. Whatever's out there, Kellen's voice dropped. It's real, and it's enormous. 42 devourers, Asher said quietly. That's our best estimate. The first time Earth faced 3, we barely stopped them. This time they're sending an armada. Kellen felt her blood turn cold. 3 had nearly destroyed humanity. 3 had forced them to sacrifice their home, their star, everything they had ever known. 42 was not a threat. It was an extinction event. The council is debating, Kellen said. They want verification from independent sources. They want committees to study the data. They want time we don't have. We know. Asher's voice was hard. That's why we're not waiting for permission. She pulled a small device from her pocket. A data chip, ancient by modern standards, but still functional. Its surface was etched with symbols that Kellen didn't recognize. She held it out, and Kellen stared at it. This contains everything, Asher said. Ship designs, weapon specifications, the mathematics behind the stellar collapse weapon. Everything humanity learned fighting the devourers the first time. Everything we've developed since. Kellen's breath caught. You're giving us your weapons technology. We're giving you a chance. Asher pressed the chip into Kellen's palm. Her fingers were warm, surprisingly gentle. The council will take weeks to decide. By then, the devourers will be in inhabited space. But if you leak this to the right people, scientists, military analysts, anyone who will listen, maybe they'll start preparing before it's too late. Kellen stared at the chip in her hand. It was impossibly small, impossibly light, and yet it carried the weight of an entire species' survival. This is treason, she said quietly. If they find out I distributed classified human technology, they'll court-martial me, strip my rank, maybe imprison me. I'm not asking lightly, officer. Asher's expression was hard but understanding. I'm asking because you're the only person in that chamber who looked at us like we were people instead of problems. Kellen remembered the council meeting, the fear in their eyes, the denial, the desperate need to believe that humanity was either extinct or a threat. She remembered how Asher had stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by 47 species, and had not flinched. Why not just broadcast it? Kellen asked. Force the issue? Because that would be an act of war. Asher turned to face her fully. It would prove every paranoid counselor right, that humanity came back to conquer, not to help. We won't force you to trust us. But if you choose to, if you decide the galaxy matters more than protocol, we'll stand beside you the way you should have stood beside us 20,000 years ago. Kellen closed her hand around the chip. She thought of her home world, her clutchmates, the billions of lives that depended on decisions made in chambers far away by people who moved too slowly. She thought of the history modules she had studied as a hatchling, the monuments she had visited, the quiet grief she had felt for a species she had never known. And she thought of the distress calls, the desperate pleas, the council's decision to look away. How long do we really have? She asked. For months. Maybe 5 if we're lucky. Asher's reflection in the viewport looked tired. The devourers move through dark matter currents. They're already closer than the sensors show. By the time the council finishes debating, half the outer colonies will be gone. And if we prepare, if we use your technology, then maybe we will survive. Asher's voice roughened. Maybe we do what the Concord should have done 20,000 years ago. Stand together. We didn't spend 200 centuries hiding in the dark just to watch the galaxy burn. We came back to fight. With you or without you. She paused. But it would be easier with you. Kellen made her decision. I'll distribute the data quietly. Research channels. Military back channels. Anonymous drops to scientists who will recognize what they're seeing. She met Asher's eyes. And when the council finds out, when they come for me, I'll tell them I did it because someone needed to care more about lives than politics. Something like respect flickered across Asher's face. You're braver than most of them, officer. I'm terrified, Kellen admitted. But I'm also tired of living in a galaxy built on comfortable lies. Asher extended her hand, the old human gesture of alliance. Kellen had studied it in history modules and had seen it in ancient recordings. She clasped it carefully, mindful of the difference in their physiologies. The human's grip was firm, warm, real. Two species, two histories, one fragile moment of trust. When this is over, Asher said, when we've stopped what's coming, the galaxy is going to have to reckon with its past, with what was done to Earth. With 20,000 years of survival we endured alone. What will humanity want? Kellen asked. Justice? Reparations? Truth? Asher's grip tightened slightly. Just the truth. Let the next generation grow up knowing what really happened. Not monuments to noble sacrifice. Not stories of martyrs who smiled while burning. The real story. Abandonment. Survival. And the choice we're making now to help. Kellen nodded slowly. I can't promise the council will change. Can't promise they'll ever admit what they did. Then we'll build something better than the council. Asher's voice was fierce. Something that doesn't sacrifice entire species when the choice gets hard. The Eternal Fleet didn't survive 20,000 years just to repeat old mistakes. We came back to build a different galaxy. One worth saving. And we're going to need people like you to help us do it. Below them, the human vessel began to move. Not away. Toward. Dozens of smaller craft detached from its hull, spreading out like seeds on a stellar wind. Each one carried technology, knowledge, warnings. Each one represented humanity's refusal to let the galaxy die in ignorance. Kellen watched them go, the data chip warm in her palm. They're going to every inhabited system, aren't they? She asked. Everyone we can reach before the devourers arrive. Asher smiled, genuinely this time, fierce and determined. The council can debate all they want. Humanity's already chosen our side. We're not asking permission anymore. We're just doing what we've always done. What's that? Surviving. Asher turned back to the viewport. And making sure as many others survive with us. The data spread faster than Klein had dared to hope. She had expected resistance, suspicion, the slow machinery of bureaucratic denial that had defined Concord for centuries. Instead, she found allies in places she had never imagined. Junior researchers hungry for truth, military officers who had always suspected the official histories were incomplete, scientists whose instruments had been whispering warnings for years but who had lacked the evidence to act. She made her drops carefully. Anonymous data packets routed through 17 relay stations, each one stripped of identifying markers, each one timed to arrive when the recipient was alone. She chose her targets with precision, not the powerful, not the connected, but the curious. The ones who asked too many questions. The ones who had been told to stop asking. They didn't stop. Within 2 weeks, human technology was being analyzed in a dozen secret laboratories across 100 systems. Ship designs that defied conventional physics. Weapon specifications that made military analysts weep with both fear and wonder. And the mathematics, the terrible, beautiful mathematics behind the stellar collapse weapon, was being studied by minds that had been trained to think the impossible was impossible. Kellen watched it all from her station on the edge of nowhere, her 4 eyes tracking data streams that her superiors were not cleared to see. She had become a ghost in the system, a shadow moving through channels that had been designed to be invisible. And she was not alone. Others had joined her, quietly, carefully. Officers who had seen the human vessel with their own eyes. Scientists who had run the numbers found the Concorde's official projections dangerously optimistic. Pilots who had been assigned to the edge sectors and had noticed the gravitational anomalies long before the humans arrived. They called themselves the Network, a loose collection of beings who had decided that protocol was less important than survival. They shared data, coordinated responses, built a shadow infrastructure that operated parallel to the Concorde's official channels. And they waited. Kellen did not wait. She worked. Every hour of every rotation, she processed the streams of information flowing through the network, cross-referencing human data with Concorde records, identifying gaps, filling them with what she had learned. The devourers were closer than anyone admitted. The outer colonies were already showing signs of disturbance. Communication delays, power fluctuations, the subtle gravitational wobbles that preceded an attack. And still the council debated. She attended their sessions remotely, her holographic form standing in the shadows while the counselors argued. They had formed committees, subcommittees, review boards. Each one demanded more data, more verification, more time. Vexith spoke of caution. Mresh spoke of precedent. Others spoke of the need to maintain stability, to avoid panic, to preserve the delicate balance of power that had kept the galaxy at peace for 20,000 years. Kellen listened to all of them, and she felt something harden in her chest. They were going to let everyone die. She was on watch when the first confirmation came. A science vessel on the outer rim had detected a mass shadow moving through dark matter currents. Something vast, something ancient, something that had no business existing in this galaxy. The ship's captain had transmitted a warning before going silent. When the rescue team arrived, they found debris, fragments of hull. Nothing alive. The Devourers had arrived. Kellen's hands moved before her mind could catch up. She keyed the network's emergency channel, sent the alert to every node in the system. The Devourers are here. Outer colonies at risk. Prepare for evacuation. Prepare for defense. Prepare for everything we've been training for. The responses came in waves. Acknowledgement, confirmation, the quiet, determined readiness of beings who had been waiting for this moment. She transmitted the human data next, the tactical projections, the defensive formations, the strategies that had saved humanity's survivors 20,000 years ago. She sent it to every military installation in the network, every research facility, every commander who had sworn to protect their people. She gave them the tools, and she prayed they would use them. The next 72 hours were chaos. The Devourers moved faster than anyone had predicted. They swept through the outer colonies like a tide of shadow, consuming everything in their path. Communication arrays went dark. Defense platforms fell. Billions of lives were snuffed out in moments, their screams echoing through the void before silence claimed them. But the network was ready. Ships that had been retrofitted with human technology launched from hidden bases. Defensive formations that had been designed in secret scattered across the battlefront. And for the first time in galactic history, the Devourers met resistance that did not break. Kellen watched the data streams with a numbness that protected her from the horror. She watched ships fall, watched colonies burn, watched beings she had never met fight and die to buy time for others to escape. She watched humanity's vessels move through the chaos with impossible precision, their ancient hulls glowing with power that had been refined over millennia. And she watched the council. They had convened an emergency session within hours of the first attack. Their faces were pale, their voices shaking. They demanded reports, demanded explanations, demanded to know how this had happened. Vexith spoke of betrayal. Mresh spoke of failure. Others spoke of the need to surrender, to negotiate, to find any way to stop the slaughter. Kellen transmitted her own report, a full accounting of the network's activities, the data distribution, the secret preparations. She sent it to every counselor in the chamber, and she watched their faces as they read it. The silence was absolute. "You," Vexith finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "You did this." "I did what was necessary," Kellen replied. "You would have done nothing. You would have debated until the Devourers reached the core worlds. You would have sacrificed billions because you were too afraid to act. You distributed classified technology. You coordinated a shadow military. You committed treason. I saved lives." Kellen's voice was cold. "While you argued, I prepared. While you deliberated, I acted. While you protected your precious protocols, I made sure the galaxy had a chance to survive." The chamber erupted. Denials, accusations, demands for her immediate arrest. Kellen stood motionless, her 4 eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed the battle raging at the edge of known space. Ships were falling. Lives were ending. But the line was holding. "You will be court-martialed," Vexith said. "You will face justice for what you've done." Kellen turned to face him fully. "You want justice? Look at the data. Look at the ships I helped prepare, the defenses I helped build, the lives I helped save. Then look at yourself. Look at what you did to humanity 20,000 years ago, and tell me who deserves to face justice." The silence was deafening. "They came back," Kellen continued. "They survived. They warned us. They gave us everything they had. And still you would have let us die. Still you would have chosen fear over action. Still you would have—" She stopped. The holographic display had shifted. A new feed was coming through, a visual of the battlefront transmitted from one of the human vessels. Kellen watched as a Devourer ship tore through a Concorde defense platform, its mass dark against the stars. And then she watched as a human ship moved to intercept, its ancient hull blazing with light. The two vessels met. The human ship did not fire, did not ram, did not use any weapon Kellen had ever seen. Instead, it did something else. Something that made the Devourer's shadow waver, its form flicker, its terrible momentum slow. And then the human ship spoke. Not to the Devourer, to the network. A single transmission, broadcast on every channel, in every language. "We are holding the line. Do not fall back. We will not fall." Kellen felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She looked at the council chamber, at the counselors who had condemned her, and she felt something shift inside her. "I am not asking for forgiveness," she said quietly. "I am not asking for understanding. I am telling you what is going to happen. We are going to fight. We are going to survive. And when this is over, when the Devourers are gone, we are going to build something better. Something that does not abandon its own." She cut the transmission, and she turned back to the battle. The battle lasted 4 months. Kellen did not sleep. She barely ate. She existed in a state of perpetual motion, her 4 eyes tracking data streams that would have broken a lesser mind. She coordinated defensive formations, routed supplies, monitored casualty reports, and watched the galaxy bleed. But the line held. Human ships moved through the chaos like ghosts, their ancient hulls glowing with power that had been refined over 20,000 years. They did not fight alone. Concorde vessels fought beside them, ships that had been retrofitted with human technology, crews that had been trained in human tactics, commanders who had chosen action over denial. The network had grown beyond Kellen's wildest dreams. Thousands of ships, millions of beings, all fighting for the same cause: survival. The Devourers came in waves. Each wave was larger than the last, each attack more desperate. They were not mindless. Kellen had learned that early. They adapted. They learned. They grew more cunning with every engagement. But the humans adapted faster. They had been fighting this enemy for longer than the Concorde had existed. They knew its patterns, its weaknesses, its fears. And they had taught the galaxy to fight back. Kellen watched from her command post as the final battle unfolded. The Devourers had pushed deep into Concorde space, their massive forms dark against the stars. They had consumed colonies, destroyed fleets, and killed billions. But they had not broken through. They had not reached the core worlds. They had not won. And now the humans were making their move. The Eternal Fleet assembled at the edge of the Veil Nebula, its ancient vessels forming a defensive line that stretched across light years. Concorde ships joined them, not because the Council had ordered it, but because their commanders had made the choice to stand together. Kellen watched the formations take shape on her display, watched the tactical data flow through the network, and she felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. Commander Asher Kinte's voice crackled through the calm. "All ships. This is Eternal Fleet Command. We are engaging the primary Devourer formation. Follow our lead. Do not break formation. Do not surrender. We have fought this enemy before. We know how to win." Kellen transmitted her response. Network command acknowledges. Standing by. The battle began. It was chaos. Beautiful, terrible chaos. Ships erupted in fire. Devourers shattered against human defenses. The void itself seemed to scream as weaponry that had been designed over millennia tore through the darkness. Kellen watched the data streams with desperate intensity, her claws flying across the console as she directed reinforcements, shifted formations, and patched the holes that the Devourers kept tearing in their lines. And then she saw it. A Devourer had broken through. Massive, ancient, unstoppable. It was heading straight for the Concorde's core worlds. Straight for the billions of lives that had been sheltered behind the defensive line. Kellen watched its trajectory with horror, watched the ships that tried to intercept it fall, watched the darkness grow closer with every passing second. She keyed the comm. Asher, we have a breach. Devourer heading coreward. We can't stop it. Asher's response was immediate. We can. Kellen watched as the human vessel separated from the formation. One ship, alone, heading toward the Devourer. It was smaller than its enemy, older, scarred. But it did not hesitate. Asher, what are you doing? What we've always done. Kellen watched the ship accelerate. Watched its shields flare. Watched it plunge directly into the Devourer's path. And then she watched it do something that made her breath catch. The human vessel began to glow. Not with the steady light of engines or weapons. Something else. Something ancient. Something that had been built into its hull 20,000 years ago, waiting for this exact moment. Asher. Kellen. The voice was calm, resolute. Remember what we talked about. Truth. Justice. The galaxy is worth saving. You're going to have to build that now. No. Asher, no. Tell them we were not monsters. Tell them we were not martyrs. Tell them we were just people. People who refused to stop fighting. The ship accelerated. Its glow intensified, blazing against the darkness like a newborn star. The Devourer turned toward it, sensing the threat too late. And then the light consumed everything. Kellen watched the detonation, watched the shockwave rip through the Devourer, tearing it apart molecule by molecule. I watched the light fade, leaving nothing behind. The comm was silent. She sat there for a long moment, her 4 eyes fixed on the empty space where the human vessel had been. She thought of Asher's handshake, her smile, her quiet determination, and then she keyed the network channel. All ships, the breach is sealed. Hold the line. We are not finished yet. The battle continued for another 17 hours. But the Devourers were broken. Without their primary formation, without the momentum they had been building, they scattered. They retreated into the dark matter currents they had come from, their shadows fading until nothing remained. The galaxy had survived. Kellen stood on the observation deck of her command vessel, watching the stars. The war was over. The Devourers were gone. And somewhere out there, humanity was mourning. She did not mourn alone. The Council had not been kind to her. They had tried to court-martial her, tried to strip her rank, tried to erase her contributions from the official history. But the network would not let them. The millions of beings who had fought and died to save the galaxy refused to forget who had made their survival possible. Kellen had been promoted. Not by the Council. By the people. She had been given a new title, a new role, a new purpose. She was the voice of the network now, the bridge between humanity and the Concorde, the living memory of what had been done and what had been forgiven. But forgiveness, she had learned, was complicated. The Council still debated. They still argued about the past, about the abandonment, about the guilt they carried. Some wanted to deny it. Others wanted to bury it. A few, a very few, wanted to admit the truth. Kellen did not care what they wanted. She looked down at her palm, where the data chip had rested. The warmth was gone now, but the memory remained. Asher's voice, Asher's words, Asher's final act of defiance. She opened the comm channel. To the eternal fleet, to humanity, to everyone who fought and died to save this galaxy. The war is over. The Devourers are gone. But we are not finished. We have a debt to pay, not of guilt but of gratitude. We have a history to rewrite, not of lies, but of truth. And we have a future to build, not of fear, but of hope. She paused. 20,000 years ago, the galaxy abandoned you. You survived anyway. You came back anyway. You saved us anyway. That is the story we will tell. That is the monument we will build. Not to sacrifice, not to martyrdom, to survive, to endurance, to the simple, stubborn refusal to stop fighting. Her voice steadied. Humanity did not save us because they were strong. They saved us because they chose to. And now we choose to. We choose to remember. We choose to honor. We choose to be better. She cut the transmission. The stars wheeled in the darkness. The human vessels drifted in the distance, their lights flickering like embers that refused to die. And somewhere, in the silence between worlds, Kellen imagined she could hear Asher's voice. Not words. Just a feeling, a quiet certainty that the galaxy had finally done what it should have done 20,000 years ago. It had stood together. And for the first time in cosmic history, the darkness had not won.